So today we're talking about Core Web Vitals, a quick interactive demonstration as to what they are and some real world examples. So let's get started. So we've got this site here that's got some images on it, and we'll see how certain factors related to the pages have an impact on Core Web Vitals. Okay, so let's go on. Let's go down here. Web Vitals, what are they? It's a Google thing, and it's all about user experience and on the web. That's the overarching concept. Web Vitals. Within Web Vitals, they have the Core Web Vitals. It's a subset of the Web Vitals, and it's used to measure. It's used to measure various things related to a website, and you'll see it all across the Google tools, most notably Google Search Console and Google Page Speed Insights, which we'll have a look at. Interesting point is that the metrics that make up Core Web Vitals evolve over time. So this is a relatively new concept, the Core Web Vitals. And during 2020, Google have announced that the things that they will be taking into account as part of their Core Web Vitals are loading interactivity, visual stability, and also interactivity. But interesting to know that they could change over time. What are the three Core Web Vitals? Well, we have stuff that, well, in order which they'll happen, I suppose. The loading of your website, LCP, largest contentful paint. What is that? It measures the loading performance to provide a good user experience. Google gives a range of what it considers good, so it should load within 2.5 seconds to get that good rating. The next thing that they look at is first input delay. Measures the interactivity, and the range there that they're looking at is 100 milliseconds. We'll go into these in a little bit more detail in some of the further slides. And the third thing that Google looks at in regards to their Web Vitals is the cumulative layout shift, CLS for short. And that sort of looks at things about how stable your web page is from a user's perspective. Do elements jump around the screen as the page is loading? Okay. The 75th percentile chosen for all metrics, so it's a comparative score really, so they're just comparing yours against all other pages out there on the internet that Google has details on, so you need to be ranking in the 75th percentile or above for all of these things in order to get an overall good rating. Interesting to note that also that the percentile which they assess these on changes over time. An example of this is the FID, which was previously, I think it was last year, at the 95th percentile. And I guess they thought that that was too aggressive and too not realistic to achieve, so they've adjusted that down to 75%. Okay, so let's move on. So we'll have a look first of all at LCP. Okay, LCP. It's an important user-centric metric for measuring perceived load speed because it marks the point in the page load timeline when the page's main content has likely been loaded. Okay, a fast LCP helps assure the user that the page is useful. Okay, so on this page, we've got 12 images, and those images are around about between 100 kilobytes to 600 kilobytes each. A total image, if we add up all those, we get 2.5 megabits per second. So let's throw this page into Google Page Speed and see what we get. I might just do can I do it should be all right. Oh. Sorry. Yeah. What happened there?
Command C, not Control.
Oh, okay. Mac. Okay. Command. God. Mac. Command V. There you go. Giddy up. Okay. See what score we get. Ooh, okay. Largest contentful paint, 10 seconds. Nos bien. Okay, so what that's telling us is that those images are probably really large in size, so it represents some opportunity for us to reduce those file size and hopefully reduce that largest contentful paint score. So let's go ahead and have a look how we've done that. So we've got a score there of 69. Let's duplicate that. And we're going to go over here now. Let's have a look at it after. So what we've done now, we've gone ahead and reduced the file size of all of these images. They're all about 8 to 21 kilobytes each, and a total file size of all 12 images for 134 kilobytes. So we've reduced that drastically from 2.4 megabits down to 134 kilobytes. So let's run that same test again. All other factors on the page are equal, nothing's changed, and is an exact copy. The only difference is the file size. Let's have a look. Come on, copy. Come on, V, after. So a single variable change, just the image sizes. It's always dangerous doing things live. Oh, great. So we've gone from a 10-second value previously to after a 2.2, and we've got the green light here in the page insight score. So great, we've ticked the box there. Let's continue. So the next factor that Google takes into account as part of the Core Web Vitals is the first input delay feature, or FID. It's a Core Web Vital metric that captures the user's first impression of a site's interactivity or responsiveness. It measures the time when a user first interacts, when a user can interact with a page, to the time when the browser is actually able to respond to that interaction. Okay, so the user is trying to click an element on the page, but the page hasn't fully loaded those elements. So the user's clicking on something that it can see, but the functionality behind that element isn't fully loaded. So that's what FID talks about. FID is a field metric and can't be simulated in the lab environment. A real user interaction is required in order to measure that response. So this is a brand new website, so Google doesn't have enough metrics for FID in this particular for this particular website. It gathers that information over time on your website. So for this particular website, we can't run an FID test on this one, because it's a real world test. If you do have an FID problem, or you see page insights returning a low value, how can you fix it? One of the main things is heavy JavaScript execution. So that's what they say. Optimizing how JavaScript parses, compiles and executes on your web page will directly reduce your FID. So essentially, you might have an element that's reliant on JavaScript. The element, whatever that might be, has already loaded, but the JavaScript hasn't loaded. So you're clicking on the element, it's relying on the JavaScript hasn't loaded, so therefore that element's not responsive. So fix your JavaScript, and Google gives a couple of ideas for how you can resolve typical JavaScript errors in that regard. Breaking up long tasks, so the JavaScript file that's particularly long, you can break it up into chunks so that only the most essential functionality is initially loaded, so you get that responsivity straight away. Optimize your page for interaction readiness. I guess that sort of goes in line with what we just said there. Use a web worker. You get those on Fiverr, I believe. Reduce JavaScript execution time. So they're tips straight from Google for how to resolve poor FID scores. All right, let's move on to CLS, cumulative layout shift. Okay, so we said before, cumulative layout shift is when a page is loading and elements on the page are jumping all over the place. That can be really annoying, and I know that I've seen a lot of big sites that are guilty of that, where I think it was Daily Telegraph was one of the worst ones, and stuff jumping all over the place, and you got to wait till it loads, and yeah, just a really poor user experience, one that I've seen typically. Yeah, so here's the actual. Have you ever been reading an article online when something suddenly changes on the page without warning? The text moves and you've lost your place, or even worse, you're about to click on a link, but the instant before your finger lands, boom, the link moves and you end up clicking something else. So that's a pretty common one that I know that I've personally come across a few times. Here's a visual example of that. So in the first instance, we've got an image that's loaded, and the user might have wanted to click on that image. Just at the moment where they're ready to click on that image, another image has been inserted above it. So inadvertently, instead of clicking on the image, you click on a banner, and that's not what the user wanted. What's the resolution to this? The resolution typically is to reserve space for the image even though it hasn't loaded. So therefore, in the first example, you would just see a blank space. The image or the banner in this example hasn't loaded, but it's not going to shift around. Space has been reserved on the page for that image, and then when the image does eventually load, it fills into that reserved space and there's no jumping around. That's CLS. Okay, so this is before. So on this page, what we can see here, if we look at the code, we can see that each of these images doesn't have a height or a width assigned to it. So as the page is rendering, the browser doesn't know how big those pages are, how big those images are. So once they do actually load, and that's the first time that the browser knows about it, that causes the images to jump around on the page. So if we run this test with no heights or widths defined, we'll get the same score here. We get a cumulative layout shift score of 1.109, and it's in the red, indicating that it's not good. All right, so let's run this. That's the problem. So that's the before shot. We can just use the previous test that we run. Let's have a look at it after. So now the same page again, exactly the same. The only thing that we've done now is added a height and a width to all of the images. Let's run exactly the same test again now with the height and the width added, and see what it does to our score, our CLS score. After. Again, a single variable test, that's the only thing that's changed. Adding height and width, everything else remained the same. How good is that? 99 out of 100.
Can you get 100?
Desktop. It's not even a Beaver Builder theme. All right, so you see there we've gone down to 0, so that's exactly what we want to see. Green lights everywhere. All right. All right, so this is straight from Google. If you've got... So if you do find yourself with a low CLS score and you're looking for ways to improve it, here's what Google says about that, how to improve your CLS. Always include size attributes of your image and video elements. Another one that I've seen also is your iframes as well. Give them a height and width. They also talk about using CSS aspect ratio boxes as an alternative to that, but I think that's a bit more of an advanced solution. Never insert content above existing content except in response to a user interaction. Okay, so that was in that first example where we saw stuff loading in above the banner ad, loading in above the other content later on down. The other way that can sometimes happen is when you change the layout via CSS, which is different to the page flow. So you might have a sidebar navigation that's on the left, but you can change the order of the elements using CSS so that under mobile they're swapped around, and then it appears after it and further on. I've seen examples where it's changing the order around because of its position on the field, and that can cause CLS issues. And the third point that Google talks about is animations, and they say they prefer transform animations as opposed to just straight animations that trigger layout changes. So just some things to consider if you're having some issues with your CLS score. Okay, so they're the three elements. Core Web Vitals, why are they important? First and foremost, because they improve user experience for a website, and secondary to that, for us as SEO professionals, Core Web Vitals will become a search signal, i.e. a ranking factor, in May next year. So we see from this little diagram that in recent years, some of the search signals for page experience are mobile friendly, safe browsing, HTTPS, and interstitials. These are things that have been recently added to as ranking factors in the algorithm. In May next year, they're going to be adding Core Web Vitals to our ranking algorithm. So an interesting point on that is, I wondered, well, how much weight does this add to as a ranking factor overall? Is it something that we should be overly concerned with? One of the, I was watching Authority Hackers last night, and it was Kyle Roof and who was the other guy? Gail Brenton. They estimate that Core Web Vitals would contribute about 1% to your ranking factor. So, certainly it's something that we should look at from a usability perspective, but how much does it add to overall SEO benefit? At 1%, it seems quite negligible, similar to these other things. But yeah, look, if it's something that we can easily implement, yeah, definitely. If it's as simple as putting height and width on our images and things like that, it's definitely something that we should have a look at. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. Any questions?